Hello and welcome to the Brit Lit Book Club. I'm your host, Vanessa Hunt, and I'm absolutely thrilled you've decided to join me on this journey through the greatest works of British literature. Before we dive in, grab yourself a cup of tea. I've got my favorite fall tea called Baby Spice from my favorite tea shop in England, Bird and Blend, steaming away here beside me. And there's something perfectly fitting about sipping tea while we explore the mysteries of British literature together. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm not just a literature enthusiast sitting in my living room with a cup of tea and a stack of books, though I do love tea and books. I'm actually the founder of the Book Club Tour, where I take fellow book lovers on literary adventures through England, to Jane Austen's house, the Bronte Parsonage, Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, and all those magical places where these incredible stories were born. But here's the thing, not everyone can hop on a plane to England tomorrow, so I created this podcast to bring those literary adventures to you, wherever you are. We're going to deep dive into the books, the authors, and most importantly, the world they lived in, because understanding their world helps us understand why these stories still matter so much today. And we're starting with the big one, the man who arguably created modern English literature as we know it, a playwright and poet whose works were performed more often than any other writer in history, someone whose phrases you probably use every day without even realizing it. You guessed it, William Shakespeare. I chose to start with Shakespeare because I spent the weekend in Cedar City, Utah, at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, where my kids competed in several competitions, including dancing, ensemble scenes, and monologues. It was a lot of work and a lot of fun, and something we do every year. And just last month, I was in Stratford-upon-Avon touring Shakespeare's home. So back to Shakespeare. Here's the question that's been bothering scholars for centuries. Who was this man, really? Because the more you dig into Shakespeare's life, the more mysterious it becomes. And today, we're going to explore that mystery. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon, a small market town in England. A child is born to John Shakespeare, a glove maker and a local politician, and Mary Arden, who came from a family with a bit more social standing. They name him William. Now, this is where our first mystery begins. We have no record of William Shakespeare's birth. We know he was baptized on April 26, 1564, at Holy Trinity Church in Stratford. Tradition says he was born on April 23rd, which would be quite poetic since that's also the day he died 52 years later. And it happens to be St. George's Day, England's patron saint. But honestly, we're just guessing. What else don't we know? We have no record of his education, though he probably attended the local grammar school. We know he married Anne Hathaway in 1582, when he was 18 and she was 26. She was pregnant, by the way, which was scandalous but not uncommon. They had 3 children, Susanna and twins Hamnet and Judith. But then, and this is the real mysterious part, William Shakespeare essentially disappears from the historical record for 7 years. From 1585 to 1592, we have no idea what he was doing. Scholars call these the lost years. Some think he was a school teacher. Others believe he worked as a lawyer's clerk, which would explain his detailed knowledge of legal terminology. Some romantic theories suggest he was poaching deer on Sir Thomas Lucy's land and fled to London to escape prosecution. The truth is, we simply don't know. What we do know is that by 1592, he's in London and already established enough in the theater world that other playwrights are jealous of him. Robert Greene, a university-educated playwright, wrote a nasty pamphlet calling Shakespeare an upstart crow, who thought himself the only Shake seen in a country. Here's what makes this so fascinating. Shakespeare wasn't university educated. In Elizabethan England, that was a big deal. Most successful playwrights went to Oxford or Cambridge. They studied classical literature, learned Latin and Greek, understood the sophisticated references that educated audiences expected. But Shakespeare, a glovemaker's son from a small town who probably never traveled outside England before moving to London, how did he know so much about Italian politics for his Italian plays? How did he understand court life so intimately? How did he write such sophisticated knowledge of law, medicine, military strategy, and classical mythology? That is what scholars call the authorship question. And it spawned countless theories. Some people think the plays were actually written by Christopher Marlowe, or the Earl of Oxford, or even Queen Elizabeth herself. The theory goes that someone of higher social standing wrote the plays and used William Shakespeare as a pen name. But here's what I find remarkable, and this ties directly into understanding Elizabethan England. The very fact that we're surprised by Shakespeare's background tells us everything about the rigid class system he was born into. Let me explain what I mean by taking you back to 1564. to the world that shaped our mysterious playwright. Picture England, 1564. Elizabeth has been on the throne for 6 years. She's 31 years old, unmarried, which is causing panic among her advisors, and she's trying to hold together a country that's been torn apart by religious upheaval for decades. Her father, Henry VIII, broke with the Catholic Church to marry her mother, Anne Boleyn. Then her half-sister Mary tried to drag England back to Catholicism, burning Protestants at the stake. Now Elizabeth is attempting a middle path, but the religious tensions are still simmering everywhere. This isn't the England of Downton Abbey, drawing rooms, and country estates. This is a country where the average person lives their entire life within a 10-mile radius of where they were born, where most people can't read or write, where life expectancy is about 35 years, and that's if you survive childhood, which about half of children don't. London, where Shakespeare will eventually make his name, was about 200,000 people crammed into what we consider a tiny area today. The Thames isn't the romantic river you see in the movies. It's an open sewer. People dump their waste directly into it. The smell must have been overwhelming. But here's the thing. It's also a time of incredible energy and possibility. England is becoming a major European power. Francis Drake is circumnavigating the globe. Walter Raleigh is attempting to establish colonies in the New World. The printing press is spreading ideas faster than ever before. And theater? Theater is exploding in popularity. When Shakespeare arrived in London in the late 1580s, there were several permanent playhouses, the Theatre, the Curtain, and soon the famous Rose. This was revolutionary. Before this, plays were performed in inn-yards, great halls, or temporary stages. Now you could make a living as an actor or playwright. But, and this is crucial, theater was not considered high art. It was popular entertainment, the equivalent of television today. Respectable people looked down on it. The city authorities constantly tried to shut down playhouses because they attracted crowds, which could spread plague, and because they were seen as morally corrupting. The audience was everybody, from groundlings who paid a penny to stand in the yard to nobles in the expensive galleries. A single play had to entertain illiterate laborers and university-educated courtier. That's an incredibly challenging audience to write for. This mixed audience explains so much about Shakespeare's writing. The bawdy jokes for the groundlings, the sophisticated wordplay for the educated, the political intrigue that would interest the courtiers, the sword fights and ghosts that would thrill everyone. To really understand who Shakespeare was and why his success was so remarkable, we need to understand the rigid social hierarchy he was born into. At the top, we have the monarch, Elizabeth I, ruling by divine right. Below her, the nobility, dukes, earls, barons. These people own vast estates and wield enormous political power. Then come the gentry, knights and gentlemen who own smaller estates but still don't work with their hands. Below them are merchants and professionals, lawyers, doctors, successful traders. This is roughly where Shakespeare's family started. His father John was a glove maker, but he was also involved in local politics, serving as an alderman and briefly as a bailiff, essentially the mayor of Stratford. Then you have yeomen, small farmers who own the land. Below them, husbandmen who rent their farms. And the bottom, laborers and servants who own nothing and work for others. This system wasn't just about money. It was about honor, blood, education. The idea that a glovemaker's son could write plays that would be performed before the queen, that was almost unthinkable, and yet that's exactly what happened. Politically, Elizabeth's England was a Protestant nation surrounded by Catholic enemies. Spain was a great threat. Philip II had been married to Elizabeth's sister Mary, and he saw himself as the rightful ruler of England. The Spanish Armada would attack in 1588 when Shakespeare was just getting established in London. Catholics in England were seen as potential traitors. They faced heavy fines for not attending Protestant services. Some were executed for treason. This creates a fascinating tension in Shakespeare's plays. He clearly knew Catholic theology and ritual, but he had to be careful about how he portrayed religious themes. The religion question actually adds another layer to Shakespeare mystery. His father John stopped attending church council meetings around 1576 and was later fined for not attending Protestant services. Some scholars think the family had Catholic sympathies, which they had to hide. If true, this would explain some of the religious imagery in the plays. And it would also explain why Shakespeare was so careful to avoid political controversy in his writing. He wasn't trying to promote Protestant or Catholic theology. He was trying to survive and succeed in a world where the wrong religious association could get you killed. So why does this all matter? Why should we care about the mysteries surrounding a playwright who died 400 years ago? First, because Shakespeare's story is about social mobility and the power of talent. Here's someone who, by all the rules of his society, shouldn't have succeeded. He didn't have the right background, the right education, the right connections, and yet he became the most successful playwright of his era. His success challenges every assumption about who gets to tell stories and whose stories matter. The university-educated playwrights of his time wrote for educated audience. Shakespeare wrote for everyone, and somehow managed to create art that works on multiple levels simultaneously. Second, because the world that shaped Shakespeare, a world of religious conflict, political uncertainty, rapid social change, and new technologies disrupting old ways of life, sounds remarkably familiar, doesn't it? Elizabethan England was grappling with questions we're still asking today. How do we balance security with freedom? How do we maintain social order while allowing our individual ambition? How do we preserve traditional values while adapting to rapid change? And finally, because the mystery of who Shakespeare really was reminds us that the most important thing about any writer isn't their biography, it's their work. We may never know exactly how the glovemaker's son from Stratford became the greatest writer in the English language, but we have the plays and the poems. We have the words that have shaped how we think about love, power, ambition, jealousy, and what it means to be human. In our next episode, we're going to dive into one of those plays, Romeo and Juliet, and explore how a story about teenage love became one of the most powerful explorations of fate, family, and social conflict ever written. We'll see how Shakespeare took an old Italian story and transformed it into something that speaks directly to our modern world. Thank you so much for joining me on this first journey into the Brit Lit Book Club. I hope I've convinced you that there's so much more to these classic authors than you might remember from school. Before we wrap up, I want to remind you that if you've ever dreamed of walking through Shakespeare's hometown, standing in a room where he was born, or watching a play at the reconstructed Globe Theatre, that's exactly what we do on the book club tour. You can find out more at thebookclubtour.com. But for now, if you're inspired to dive deeper into the world we've explored today, I've got some fantastic book recommendations for you. For Shakespeare biography and mystery, Bill Bryson's Shakespeare, The World as Stage is absolutely perfect if you want to know more about the mysteries we discussed today. Bryson has this powerful way of making the gaps in our knowledge feel like an adventure rather than frustration. He's honest about what we don't know while painting a vivid picture of what we do. If you're intrigued by the authorship question, pick up Elizabeth Winkler's Shakespeare Was a Woman and Other Heretical Ideas. Now, I'm not saying I believe the conspiracy theories, but Winkler raises fascinating questions about how we think about genius, education, and social class in Shakespeare's time. It's thought-provoking. James Shapiro's 1599 is fantastic if you want to understand how Shakespeare's world shaped his greatest works. It focuses on the single year he wrote Henry V, Julius Caesar, As You Like It, and Hamlet. Shapiro knows how the political tensions and social changes of that specific moment influence these masterpieces. For modern takes on Shakespeare, if you've enjoyed thinking about how Shakespeare's themes connected to our modern world, Jodi Picoult's By Any Other Name is brilliant. It's a dual timeline novel that weaves together the story of a modern playwright discovering a lost Shakespeare play with the story of Emilia Bassano, a real woman who some believe influenced Shakespeare's work. It's part historical fiction, part feminist reclamation, and completely engaging. For a deeper dive into Elizabethan history itself, I love Liza Pickard's Elizabeth's London. She covers everything from what people ate to how they handled sewage. It's the kind of social history that makes you feel like you're walking through Shakespeare's London. And here's a fun one. If you want something lighter, The Wednesday Wars by Gary Schmidt. It's technically a young adult novel, but it's about a 7th grader who has to spend Wednesday afternoons reading Shakespeare with his teacher. It's funny and moving, and it shows how these 400-year-old plays still speak to us today. Next week, we're tackling Romeo and Juliet, not as a simple love story, but as a complex exploration of how individual desire clashes with social expectations. It's going to be fascinating. Until then, keep reading, keep questioning, and remember, every time you say something is a wild goose chase or describe a situation as neither here nor there, you're speaking Shakespeare's words. The glovemaker's son from Stratford is still shaping how we talk 400 years later. And if all this talk about Shakespeare has you dreaming of standing in his actual birthplace or watching a performance at the Globe, well, that's exactly the kind of literary adventure that made me start the book club tour in the first place. There's something magical about experiencing these stories in the places where they were born. That's pretty remarkable, isn't it? Well, my tea's getting cold, so until next time, keep reading and stay curious. Bye!